10 Years Old, a comment in Poetry, a Magazine of Verse, by Harriet Monroe. This is recorded to celebrate the 10th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Measured by the stars, 10 years are but the trillionth of a twinkle. Measured by earth eons, they are a tiny fraction of a heave. Measured by historic time, they are a little tenth of a century, one of 1,000 or more brief decades which have unrolled an open scroll for man to write his record on in ink or blood. Measured by human life, they are 1/7 of its allotted span, a fourth or a fifth of its period of power. A slight affair all this, a mere wink of watchful eyes that somewhere, somehow, look on at the mysterious march of life. But measured by events of literary history, 10 years may be long enough to outlast the language or the race. In 10 years the Greek drama became, in our limited human sense of the word, immortal. In 10 years the urbane Roman inscribed his civilized message on the scroll. In a third of 10 years a vagabond Galilean told a few stories, and preached, and died. In 10 years, was it more or less, a melancholy exile in Italy made the affairs of his neighbors important forever. In 10 years Hamlet and King Lear and Much Ado About Nothing were born into imperishable life. In 10 years Byron, Shelley, and Keats were singing songs too beautiful to be forgotten. In 10 years Poe uttered his last lyric cry, and Whitman began to gather his leaves. And so of our 10 years what will be said? The 10 years of the World War, of falling and rising nations, of the Russian Revolution, of 1,000 new movements and new hopes? In the face of events so tremendous, will the world little heed nor long remember what we say here, or will it accept our offering as adequate, and repeat over and over, through the crowded ways of the new time, the songs which our poets have sung to a changing age? Who are they, these poets of the decade which poetry has counted off from month to month, with never a break, since October, 1912? Since Ezra Pound, with much tumult and shouting, buried the dry bones of the past and sounded the tocsin for a new era? In singles and pairs and cohorts they came trooping: Vachel Lindsay, Robert Frost, Carl Sandburg and Edgar Lee Masters, Wallace Stevens, D.H. Lawrence and T.S. Eliot, Conrad Aiken and Rupert Brooke, Sarah Teasdale and Edna St. Vincent Millay, the Imagists, H.D. and Amy Lowell, Richard Aldington, John Gould Fletcher, the Ironists, Carlos Williams, Alfred Kreinborg, Maxwell Bodenheim, Marianne Moore. Robinson had begun over a decade before, Masefield and Witter Benner and Arthur Fick a few years. Ford Madox Hueffer repented Victorian sins, and swung new made into the procession. Tagore translated himself, Whaley and others translated the Chinese, and aboriginal singers were interpreted by Frank Gordon, Constance Skinner, Mary Austin, and the other poets of the Rainbow Anthology. And besides these, poets of other nations have come in by the translator's bypath: poets from France, from the Spanish countries, from Russia, from Scandinavia. At least, it is a long list, and a varied one, which we of the past decade offer to the serene choice of the next age. On this 10th anniversary, it would be idle for poetry to deny a certain pride in its share of the record, in its measure of responsibility for the gathering together of these poets, in its offer of an exhibition gallery and an audience. The gallery may have been far from perfect, and the editorial jury far from wise, but the audience, though smaller than it should be, has been choice and penetratingly cosmopolitan. Poetry has readers all over the world. We may take some pride, also, in the stimulating effect of the magazine upon this far-flung audience. "Poetry has changed my point of view," says one. "The verse I wrote 10 years ago seems stilted." Another writes, Here in China you are my only contact with the new poets, the new ideas. A wandering Englishman sends us from Port Said the group of sketches included in the present number, confessing, "I don't know whether these are poetry or not, but a friend showed me a copy of your magazine, and I decided to offer them." From Madrid, from Constantinople, from Brazil and the City of Mexico, and far away antipodal Tasmania, come constantly these evidences that poetry is enriching lives and stimulating the impulse toward artistic expression, toward the creation of beauty. Still more precious than these evidences from lands remote are the proofs we receive from people nearer home. Such proofs as the following, mentioned recently by Lou Sarrett after a lecture trip in Iowa, and written out at the editor's request. The January number of Poetry, which I found on file in the reading room of the Public Library of Council Bluffs, was much thumbed and dog-eared. The librarian said that the magazine is read by many. At Mount Ayr, tucked away down in the southwest corner of the state, a man drove in for my address 30-odd miles. He told me that he subscribed for poetry, believed that it was doing a fine work. He was an exceedingly well-read man, a leavening force, I imagine, in that remote corn-fed section. At Clear Lake, 12 miles from Mason City, half a dozen women came up to me after the lecture and said that they had come over from Mason City to hear me. One of them asked why I failed to read one of the stanzas in one of my poems. I was surprised; she apparently knew my poems as well as I did. The facts came out. She and the other women were librarians in Mason City. They said that they read poetry every month, that many people in Mason City read it, and that as soon as the magazine arrives each month, all the librarians read it. These facts should be very heartening to you. They were to me. They show this much, if no more: poetry is reaching and molding the, what shall we call it, the rank and file, the non-aesthetes, you name it, to a larger degree than one might think. Too often the statement is made that a literary journal like Poetry reaches only a limited, pinched-out art group. So it does one's heart good to see that it is a force in the lives of many just plain folk. It pleases me particularly because it tends to show that the Gopher Prairies of Sinclair Lewis are not all so benighted and artistically dead as he alleges. Such testimony is precious because it proves an influence profound and fundamental exerted by the magazine. If America is ever to have a rich spiritual life, and to express that life in art, this art must come, not from super-civilized coteries, but from the vital strength of the nation. Too much of the vital strength of the nation is now being frittered away in Gopher Prairie banalities, an emptiness in which the art impulse is smothered, in which the seed of genius can never come to flower. The spiritual enrichment of the Gopher Prairies is the great problem, the stimulation of faith in the heart of the people, faith in their power not only to perceive but to create beauty. Without such faith life is stagnant. Everywhere there are pitiful gropings toward it, which need impulse and direction. If poetry is one of the quickening influences which will make a vital people aware of its imaginative and creative power, then we may feel indeed that our 10 years of labor have not been thrown away. The great ages of art, we have said it often, come only when a widespread creative impulse meets an equally widespread impulse of sympathy. A masterpiece is rarely an isolated phenomenon, a single tree from a chance-sown seed dropped from the wings of Pegasus, but almost always the product of group influence, the highest tree in a forest. When every Gopher Prairie has its local exhibition, its dramatic society producing not only ready-made plays, but also the experiments of its members, its musical society hospitable to local compositions, and its poetry group writing and criticizing poetry from within as well as reading it from without. When all this happens, the future of American art will take care of itself. On its 10th birthday, Poetry acknowledges with thanks the monthly salutation of its readers, and salutes them in return. 10 years, as we said above, are a long time, measured by events of literary history, and may be multiplied indefinitely in human memory. Whether the magazine will be recorded in the history of 20th century literature, only the future can decide. But in the history of such enterprises, poetry may claim a proud preeminence. The Germ, the Chap Book, the Yellow Book, Blast, Poetry and Drama, New Numbers, others—none of these lived 10 years. Nor could poetry have survived so long without its guarantors, to whose loyalty its poets and readers, as well as its editors, owe their appreciative thanks. It may be that no such work as ours can be done without endowment. Indeed, precedents in the other arts would seem to prove this. Whether we cease tomorrow, or continue another decade, we shall hope that such endeavors for the art may go on, under abler minds and ever more liberal auspices. H.M. End of 10 Years Old by Harriet Monroe. Read by Laurieann Walden.